Director John Boorman is a personal favorite of mine that doesn't get enough respect and reverence in cinephile circles, apart from perhaps Deliverance. I'm trying to remedy that. This is the second part of a 3-part look at the films of John Boorman. If you haven't seen part 1, perhaps watch that first. This second part deals with the films he made between 1974 and 1985, dubbed the Transcendental Years, referring to the mythical, spiritual and magical arena he enters with this next phase of films. This analysis or review, or whatever you want to call it, is made for YouTube, and the clips from Boorman's films have been cropped, as Letterboxd is not as suitable for YouTube, I don't think. But please keep in mind that one particular aspect of Boorman's visual style is extreme widescreen, or characters in either end of the screen, horizontally opposite or diagonally, moving towards or away from the screen in a central or diagonal position. There is a conscious effort in the framing of each shot, and Boorman clearly knows what he's doing. Please keep that in mind when you watch these films, and be sure to get to watch Boorman's films in the original format for full effect. If you enjoyed this video, please consider subscribing and hitting that bell. There will be possible spoilers to some of these films, so please be aware. Thank you. In 1970, United Artists announced that Boorman was to develop a film adaptation of J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. Sadly, the film never happened. I do think Boorman could have done something special, but Peter Jackson didn't do a shabby job either, so I guess I'm satisfied with that.
Come on, Mr. Frodo. I can't carry it for you, but I can carry you. Come on!
Alrighty then.
When a filmmaker has a commercial hit, especially if it's also critically acclaimed, then the filmmaker often gets the chance to make their big, expensive passion project. And after Deliverance, which was both critically acclaimed and commercially successful, Boorman decided to do just that. His next film would be Zardoz, a sort of post-apocalyptic Wizard of Oz, with plenty of satire and bizarre moments. Some, if not most, view this film as bonkers, something to mock. Oh, what sad people those petty humans are. True, it might look camp or silly, but I see more. I don't look at films in such a superficial way. That is why I love certain B-movies, because if the story is good, or if the idea is good, even if ill-conceived, or if the spirit of the film is in the right place, then stuff like Sean Connery's outfit is not something that bothers me. But to be honest, I don't need to defend this film. It has aged well, I think. In fact, the older it gets, the better it gets. This is a gem in the Boorman filmography. This one, together with Leo the Last, are probably the two films he made that I imagine goes really well with weed.
I am a pacifist! Here! Get out!
I particularly love the use of Beethoven's Symphony No. 7 in Zardoz. And even though I think it's a great film, Boorman himself is somewhat surprised the film has achieved a sort of cult status.
Yesterday I went to Fox. They're restoring a film I made, Zardoz. They wrote to me and said they were restoring it. I said, why? And they said, well, there's a lot of interest in it. Oh, really? And so, you know, it's one of those films that went from being a failure to a classic without ever passing through success. And so I went over there, and I said, I've got a confession to make. This is the first time I've seen it since I made it, in 45 years or something. And I made it with the great Jeffrey Unsworth. It was a joy to just to see it again as it was originally. You know. I remember seeing Billy Wilder in Cannes, and he said he'd just done Buddy Buddy, which is his last film. I said, how's the film? And Billy said, well, John, you know, our movies like our children, and every time we have a kid, we hope he's going to grow up to be Einstein. And sometimes they turn out to be congenital idiots. If you have a child with a bit of a handicap, you're always fonder of that child than you are of the healthy, robust ones. So you have that little bit of special place in your heart for your orphans.
Zardoz is set in 2293. Slaves tilled the land and gathered the crops, and they're ruled over by sadistic masters who sometimes gallop around killing off the surplus population. One of these exterminators is Zed, played by Sean Connery. Outside these wastelands lies the Vortex. Here lives the immortals. Every time they die, their bodies are relentlessly restored by the all-knowing mystical computer mind that runs the Vortex. The immortals can, however, grow old, and for infractions, they're sentenced to age a few years, which I think is a nice twist to the immortal aspect.
Old friend, this is your fault.
Our protagonist, Zed, eventually finds himself inside the Vortex and becomes an object of great interest for them. And this class of cultures, one sophisticated and the other brutish, is what the film is about. It's also very prophetic.
I mean, it's not a science fiction world. It's not a world of technology. And I felt, I'm not really interested in science part of science fiction, because I think the future won't be scientific. It won't be about hardware. So in Zardoz, the technology has been totally inverted. It's so integrated with the human mind and the human brain and the human nervous system that you don't see things. There aren't machines and press buttons and things. Just the communicator ring, the crystal ring, in which people communicate sort of mind to mind.
The film is clearly a satire, but what is satirical about it might vary depending on who is watching the film.
Let's take yet another boringly democratic vote, shall we, Consuela?
But some themes are obvious, like that of control, power and class. I see something new every time I watch it, and I highly recommend you watch it as well. Compared to Alejandro Jodorowsky's surreal fantasy film The Holy Mountain from 1973, Zardoz might be as mainstream as they come. But the two films do share a similar vibe. I can't put my finger on exactly what, but either reminds me of the other. Perhaps Boorman saw The Holy Mountain and was inspired. Boorman's next film would be his most hated, the 1977 sequel to The Exorcist, Exorcist II, The Heretic. The film is set 4 years after the original film and centers on the now 16-year-old Regan McNeil, who is still recovering from her previous demonic possession. A critical failure at the time of its release, Exorcist II is often considered to be one of the worst films ever made. Worst film ever made? That's a bit of a stretch. I can think of 100 films that are way, way worse than this one.
last thing we say to each other.
Even the film often ranked worst of all, Ed Wood's Plan 9 from Outer Space, is far from the worst. When I rank a film to be good or bad, I look at it first and foremost on the idea or the plot. Is it a story I want to know more about? Do I ask myself, what will happen next? Can I not predict what will happen? And if I can't, well, that's good. Another aspect that is important is, does the film charm me? Does it either satisfy my mind or my heart or both? Can I see the vision of the director? Does the film feel like someone actually made it, or does it feel like conveyor belt trash? When it concerns Ed Wood, I don't think he was the worst director ever, which is what he has been called, because Ed Wood has a vision, he has a heart and a will that comes through his films, regardless of how technically bad they might be. There's something punk about him that I love. Glen or Glenda is, I think, his masterpiece, and a film that was way, way, way ahead of its time.
Why is the modern world shocked by this headline? Why? Once, not so very long ago, the people of the world were saying,
airplanes. Why, it's against the Creator's will. If the Creator wanted us to fly, he'd have given us wings.
but we fly.
Most garbage coming out from Hollywood these days are extremely predictable. If the effects are good or bad, it doesn't really matter to me, as long as they tried their best. Effects always have a tendency to age, and I can't suspend my disbelief. Effects that look super realistic require also the suspension of disbelief as well, because I can easily say, well, that looks really realistic, that's some really good CGI. So in any case, if you see something that's not real, obviously not real, you know it's an effect of some sort. In a 2005 interview, Boorman said, "It all comes down to the audience expectations. I wanted a film about journeys that was positive, about good, essentially. And I think that audiences in hindsight were right. I denied them what they wanted, and they were pissed off about it. Quite rightly. I knew I wasn't giving them what they wanted, and it was a really foolish choice."
The power of Christ compels you!
Guess what? It's not that compelling.
I think one way to understand and enjoy Exorcist II is to consider it as a standalone film, because that is kind of what it is. Watch the film on its own merit. I don't consider it one of Boorman's best films, not top tier at all, but I don't consider it bad either. The original Exorcist is not a film I've watched many times. It's a horror film, and once you know the scary bits, you get used to it. What I liked most about that film, apart from the music, was the opening sequence when Max von Sydow's character was doing his archaeological research. Since there are more of that kind of research going on in the sequel, I kind of enjoy that more. But the original, in terms of being a solid film, is better than the sequel. There's no doubt about that.
When I finished reading Bill Goodhart's screenplay, my hands were sweating, and I was terrified but immensely stimulated by the ideas that it contained, particularly this idea of exploring the possibility of a kind of world mind. The last few years, there's been an explosion of research into these areas of ESP and thought transference and related phenomena. In our script, we have what is really a logical extension of this research, very close to what is being done. It's called synchronized hypnosis.
I want you to concentrate on the strobe light.
We have the psychiatrist and the priest, each in their different ways, concerned about this girl who is possessed by two forces, one of good and one of evil, which are warring within her.
Apparently, Martin Scorsese also prefers the sequel to the original, at least when it concerns the theological perspective. The core of this film is to look at what happens if the wings of evil touches a good soul.
The key factor is the brushing of the wings. When it is dry, the grasshoppers go their own way, happy-go-lucky individuals. When a heavy rain hatches them out in large numbers, why then they crowd together so that their wings brush against each other. The agitation transforms them. But most importantly, the brushing of the wings changes their personality. They become a destructive, voracious, marauding swarm with a single mind. A locust mind, if you will. The evil swarm sweeps relentlessly over the earth, possessing all that it touches. Evil breeding evil by contact.
When the wings have brushed you, is there no hope once the wings have brushed you?
We try. With the help of science.
The concept of the anima mundi is prevalent in the film. All living things on the planet are connected, and this connection is called the world soul, the anima mundi. There is also something called spiritus mundi, world spirit, and something called the world mind. Just as we're all connected, all good is connected, and all evil is connected. And if the world achieves an evil world, one mind, then all hope would be lost.
Let's stick to science.
Don't hide behind science, you're better than that.
This is a very shamanic film and features some shamanic practices. The transcendental aspects of the period Boorman is in is visible in The Exorcist II, and perhaps he should have made his own film rather than a sequel to The Exorcist. Perhaps it would have been better received.
This young boy, he has very special powers. They need his help against the locust swarm. But perhaps the swarm comes because of the boy. Does great goodness draw evil upon itself?
The score was composed by the great Ennio Morricone, and the film even features Darth Vader himself. Even though most people hated it, the film must have been influential in some way. Or is this simply a coincidence? Excalibur is without a doubt my favorite film of all time. I love it dearly. There are many reasons for this. Its cinematic qualities, its subject matter, its characters, the music, the direction, the emotion it gives me, the nostalgia. I've probably seen it hundreds of times. A constant source of inspiration. An important film for me on a deeply personal level. So this makes me very biased. You might not have any of these feelings for this film, and for that, I'm sorry. Because from my perspective, Excalibur is a cinematic masterpiece. It's got it all. Action, romance, violence, pain, sorrow, horror, magic, gore, wonder, humor, and depth.
No riddles, nothing but a simple yes? That frightens me.
But a king should be afraid, Arthur, always, of the enemy, waiting everywhere, in the corridors of his castle, on the deer paths of his forest, or in a more tangled forest. In here.
Excalibur was released in 1981 and retells the legend of King Arthur and the Knights of the Round Table. Based on the 15th century Arthurian romance Le Morte d'Arthur by Thomas Malory. The film is named after the legendary sword of King Arthur that features prominently in Arthurian literature. It stars Nigel Terry as Arthur, Nicol Williamson as Merlin in his greatest role, Nicholas Clay as Lancelot, Cherry Lungi as Guinevere, Helen Mirren as Morgana, Liam Neeson as Gawain, Gabriel Byrne as Uther Pendragon, Paul Jeffrey as Percival, and Patrick Stewart himself as the Duke of Cornwall. Boorman also cast his daughter in the role of Igraine, King Arthur's mother, and his son Charlie Boorman as young Mordred. Excalibur was shot entirely on location in Ireland, employing Irish actors and crew. It's been acknowledged for its importance to the Irish filmmaking industry and for helping launch the film and acting careers of a number of Irish and British actors, including Liam Neeson, Patrick Stewart, and Gabriel Byrne. Excalibur has aged fabulously. The Arthurian legends are old, and because of this, the film doesn't look new and has that old look. That look no CGI could render. It makes it feel closer to the Arthurian age than any modern film version could. And there have been some horrible modern examples, without soul or spirit. Take this scene, for example.
Left foot, right foot, collect your brand, back on the barge.
Sound effects, Dutch angles and slow motion can't save this piece of trash. I prefer Boorman any day of the week. It has way more simplicity and class. The score of the film is a perfect unity of music and visuals. The soundtrack is a combination of the music of Richard Wagner and Carl Orff, along with an original score by Trevor Jones. To realize that Wagner should score the Arthurian legends is a stroke of genius, and they fit perfectly. Some critics have complained about the dialogue, but I love it. I think it's well written and fits the subject matter. The film concerns the Arthurian legends. You got to suspend your disbelief and allow it to be grand and theatrical. That's why I love it so much. A good example of the kind of dialogue this film has can be seen in the following scene. King Arthur discovered his wife's affair with Sir Lancelot many years ago, and when he did so, he lost his trusted sword Excalibur. But now, many years later, with a revitalized spirit, having found the Holy Grail, he visits his estranged wife. She is now a nun in a convent, and the two reconcile.
I've often thought that in the hereafter of our lives, when I owe no more to the future, can be just a man, that we may meet, and you'll come to me and claim me yours. It is a dream I have.
What was that? First a smile, then a sort of emotionless look, then a little smile again, implying what? Love? At peace? Still her heart with Lancelot? What? A smile as mysterious as the Mona Lisa. Nicole Williamson's portrayal of Merlin is one of the delights of this film. Here are just a few of the gems.
I have walked my way since the beginning of time. Sometimes I give, sometimes I take. It is mine to know which and where.
You must help me, Merlin!
Must I?
I am your king!
So, you need me again now that my truce is wrecked. Years to build and moments to ruin, and all for lust. You're not listening. Your heart is not. Love is deaf as well as blind. That's it. For it is the doom of men that they forget. Good and evil, there never is one without the other.
The Merlin and Morgana relationship in the film is perhaps more interesting than the famous love triangle between King Arthur's wife, Guinevere, and his best knight, Sir Lancelot. There is great chemistry between the two actors, And perhaps it's because Boorman knew that the two were on less than friendly terms due to personal issues that arose during the production of Macbeth a few years earlier.
Mandrake. The essence of it can prolong the act of love.
And if too much is taken?
Pain and death. That's it.
Throughout the film, Merlin uses something called the charm of making in order to perform his magic. The language is some sort of Celtic or Old Irish, and the most likely interpretation of the spoken words are Serpent's breath, the charm of death and life, thy omen of making.
Anal na trach, urfas bethad,
Green is universally associated with nature and with magic. It also represents growth and renewal, and clearly the reason why Boorman had the great idea to project the color green onto the forest itself, especially when Excalibur was close by. It's a very simple yet effective effect. Some complain about the accents in the film. For instance, some say the accent of young Arthur is horrible compared to old Arthur. It could be. Not being a native English speaker, I might not be as sensitive to this, but I thought Nigel Terry did an excellent job portraying the young, inexperienced Arthur and then the seasoned King Arthur. They also complain about how the film is acted or how the action was done, and all these complaints are not worthy to spend any time on. The people who complain about this film clearly do not get it. This is the greatest film ever made as far as I'm concerned. It's epic, it's grand, it should be. It's the Arthurian legends, for God's sake. Excalibur is like an old friend that I always visit, and when I do, everything is the same as if we had never been apart. There are other films that could be classed cinematically as a greater film, certain Kubrick or Kurosawa films, for example. Or even The Godfather or Shawshank Redemption, if you want to take the mainstream view. But for me, Excalibur will always have a special place in my heart. I've always had an interest in the Arthurian legends, in magic, in the occult, and in the Holy Grail. Or perhaps because I saw this film for the first time as a young boy. This film is the reason I have those interests.
I can't believe it. I mean, 20 years I've been waiting for this moment.
It had been a lifelong ambition of mine to make this film. And when I saw that shot of Arthur and the ship, I felt that I'd completed my work.
In 1985, Boorman releases The Emerald Forest. The film is set in the Brazilian rainforest and allegedly based on a true story, although some dispute this, I don't. The story revolves around the son of an engineer that is abducted by an indigenous tribe on the edge of the rainforest. The engineer then spends the next 10 years searching for his son, only to discover that he has become part of the tribe. An additional conflict is the very real problem regarding deforestation that the engineer is involved with, and what the indigenous people struggle to oppose. This film is as relevant today as when it first came out. Boorman's own son plays the son of the engineer.
I cast my son, Charlie, he was 17, for a number of reasons. First of all, because he has a beautiful personality, has a simplicity and a purity at that age. I knew I could work with him in these difficult circumstances. And, you know, there was a lot of opposition to it. And because of that, I suppose I was very hard on him because I was, you know, desperately wanted him to work.
You know, there were a lot of people who were quite negative towards the fact that I was going to play the lead role. And so I think in some ways, You know, when I was working with Dad, you know, it was always one take with me and, you know, 6 or 7 takes with other people. So, you know, I had to really be on it. And I think it was partly that to prove to people that I could do the part and stuff like that. So he used to put me in these ridiculous situations where I would have to sort of bounce down this waterfall, and Dad would do it all in one shot.
The film is as anthropologically authentic as you could make it in 1985, filmed in the Amazon with real indigenous people. Boorman has always had a connection with nature, and you can see this in his films. Trees, forests and rivers are recurring elements of his films, most of all in this one.
Trees are somehow part of childhood, aren't they? Climbing trees is a fundamental instinct. I think it probably goes back to the very sources of human nature, the relationship with man and trees. One of my earliest memories, I used to have this tree I used to got and stuff, and I made a little platform at the top. And I used to go up there and read. Nobody could find me or get to me. They couldn't be seen from below. That was a really sacred place to me. When I was preparing Emerald Forest and I travelled through the Amazon rainforest, I of course began to experience the rainforest, and I realised just how majestic and extraordinary they were, and then also the vast tracts that were being cut down. You know, the cause was very close to me.
I think I was about 17 when we went and did the Emerald Forest together. It was a real eye-opener for me, and back in 1984 it was the first time that people sat down in the cinema and actually saw what was actually happening in the jungle.
Boorman actually went to the Amazon and lived with a single tribe and tried to learn about them firsthand. Boorman stayed at the house of Takuma, the shaman or chief of the Kamaira village. He was more of a priest than a ruler. And the indigenous people in the village lived in a kind of collective security, protecting one another from external dangers. These tribes are indeed viewed by anthropologists as near pristine models of the Neolithic past. Boorman stayed 3 weeks, saw the boredom of repetitive daily tasks transform itself for him into a kind of beauty in the knowledge of permanency. Boorman didn't want to make the film in a real indigenous village because of the disruption it would cause them. So he hired professional indigenous actors from families in Rio de Janeiro or Belém, for the most part, who had left tribal life, and he had them taught Kamaira rituals and dances. Boorman's ultimate acceptance by the Kamaira led to long talks with its shaman, Takuma. Increasingly, Boorman said, I felt Takuma was in possession of a knowledge, a consciousness that far surpassed my own. I can't imagine ever seeing things quite the same again. I've been to the Amazon on numerous occasions myself, and I can strongly relate to what Boorman is saying, especially the slow, calm pace of daily life. Something very different from living in a busy city, and a strong reason why I've abandoned that life to live in a house surrounded by trees. I can also attest to having learned more from my indigenous brothers and sisters, mothers and fathers, than I've ever learned from any teacher in any school I've attended. Not only should you watch this film, but you should also ally yourself with the important struggle indigenous people fight in order to protect their human rights and the biological diversity their territories contain. Shamanism is associated with indigenous and tribal societies and encompasses the notion that shamans are mediators or messengers between the human world and the spirit world. The term shamanism was first applied by Western anthropologists. But of course it is a problematic term because it's used to refer to a variety of different cultures and practices around the world. And they can vary dramatically and may not be accurately represented by a single concept. But so popular has the term become that these days it's common for indigenous cultures that traditionally did not have that term to now use it to describe their healers and medicine men and women. All the films Boorman made during his Transcendental Years have shamanism at its core, or at least the notion of transformation.
Percival. I didn't know how empty was my soul until it was filled.
In the middle of the 80s and up until present day, Boorman's career moves into what I like to call the conscious years, 1987 to 2014. Stay tuned for part 3.